The neighborhood was the kind of place real estate brochures called charming and peaceful, where hydrangeas bloomed in perfect symmetry and neighbors waved with choreographed smiles. It sat tucked behind a white bricked entrance with an elegant gate that rolled open slowly, almost ceremoniously, for its residents. On the surface, everything felt serene. Kids played hopscotch on driveways, dogs trotted behind joggers, and the faint sound of wind chimes filled the evening air. But beneath the manicured lawns and synchronized holiday lights, the true power in the neighborhood wasn't held by the residents, it was ruled by the homeowners association. Jamal had moved into his corner lot house 3 years ago, lured by the promise of quiet living and modern infrastructure. A software engineer by trade and an environmentalist at heart, he'd spent his first year upgrading his home with smart features, rainwater harvesting, and his favorite addition, high-efficiency solar panels installed on his roof and backyard pergola. They weren't just for show. Jamal had rigged a backup system that could store energy and even provide emergency power if the grid ever failed. It was the kind of setup that made engineers smile and HOA members frown, especially one in particular. Karen, the newly elected president of the HOA, had a knack for sniffing out what she called aesthetic violations and community disruptions. From the moment she laid eyes on Jamal's solar panels, painted sleek black and gleaming in the sun, she decided they didn't belong. Jamal, ever the peacekeeper, tried not to read into it. He just wanted to live quietly, take care of his home, and contribute something meaningful to his community. What he didn't realize, what none of them realized, was that those very panels did more than keep his lights on. They were protecting everyone, and one day, that truth would come crashing down. Karen didn't start with the solar panels. At first, it was the mailbox. Jamal's was a sleek, dark bronze with a minimalist design, modern, clean, and practical. But Karen left a printed notice in his mailbox claiming it didn't match the neighborhood's colonial theme and should be replaced with a white, brass-handled version like everyone else's. Jamal chuckled, thinking it was just a quirky suggestion. Then came the follow-up warning, and then a formal notice. He complied just to avoid the hassle, but that was only the beginning. Karen saw her position as HOA president not as a duty, but as a throne. She walked the streets with a clipboard and a glare, noting every unsightly basketball hoop, every improperly trimmed bush, every garden gnome that dared smile at her in rebellion. Residents grumbled in whispers, but few stood up to her. She was relentless. Every week came with a new notice, a new violation, a new rule passed by the board she had gradually stacked with passive yes-men. The power trip wasn't just about regulations, it was personal. Jamal, with his quiet demeanor and eco-conscious upgrades, became a silent challenge to her authority. She'd never say it outright, but there was something about his independence that got under her skin. He didn't attend HOA social mixes. He didn't participate in the newsletter committee. He kept to himself, yet his home was admired by many. His lawn was immaculate, his holiday lights tastefully minimal, and his solar panels, those panels, stood like futuristic sentinels above the traditional rooftops. They annoyed her simply by existing. At one board meeting, she made a casual comment about unsightly tech cluttering our rooftops. Jamal knew who it was aimed at, but he let it slide. The other members nodded awkwardly, not daring to contradict her. She didn't know, at least not fully, that the panels were helping the entire community during power shortages. Or maybe she did, and it only fueled her irritation. He was doing something useful, and she hated not being the one in control. What Karen craved more than order was obedience, and Jamal, in her eyes, was out of line. To her, his panels were more than just solar. They were a quiet rebellion, and she wasn't about to let that go unpunished. Jamal's solar panel setup wasn't just advanced, it was a small marvel. Every inch of it had been planned with precision, from the angle of the panels to the placement of the battery system hidden in his garage. He'd designed it not just to power his own home, but to act as a microgrid when needed. Most of the neighbors thought the panels were just another flashy tech upgrade, the kind of thing a computer guy might install to save on his electric bill. But what they didn't know was that Jamal's system had already saved the entire block once. It happened during a freak summer storm. Lightning had struck a transformer down the road, cutting power to half the neighborhood. Streetlights flickered out, security cameras went dark, and people rushed outside, confused and uneasy. Jamal was one of the few with power. He didn't think twice. He connected his battery system to the community's shared surveillance hub and security lighting, a project he had quietly offered help with months earlier. Within minutes, the street cameras were online again, and motion-triggered floodlights blinked back to life. A few neighbors clapped. One even called him a genius. The HOA, under its previous leadership, had thanked him privately. No big announcement, no plaque, but a nod of appreciation and a verbal agreement to let him maintain his panels without interference. That silent pact gave Jamal the space to continue refining his setup. He upgraded the storage system to a higher-capacity lithium-ion bank and added a real-time monitoring dashboard. From that panel, he could see power flow from the sun into his home and outward to the communal security infrastructure, street cameras, perimeter lighting, and even a few smart locks for shared buildings. It wasn't about pride or attention. Jamal believed in community resilience. If the grid failed again, he wanted people to feel safe. He didn't advertise what he'd done, didn't brag at meetings, and never asked for reimbursement. His only condition was simple: let him keep the panels as they were. That promise had held for nearly a year. But when Karen took over, all of that changed. She didn't care about power flows or community benefit. All she saw was a violation of uniformity, and in her world, that was reason enough to strike. The letters started showing up again, folded neatly in HOA envelopes. They bore Karen's signature in sharp blue ink. Notice of non-compliance, they read. At first, it was about the color of the solar panels. Too reflective. Then it was their placement, visible from the street. Jamal had the original permits, photographs, and even an email thread with the previous HOA president approving the installation. He made copies and mailed them back with polite explanations, thinking that would settle it. It didn't. The next week, another notice, this time with a threat. Failure to address these violations may result in daily fines. Jamal sighed and looked up at the panels that had served him and the neighborhood so well. He knew this wasn't about aesthetics. Karen had made up her mind the day she stepped into power. She didn't just want order, she wanted control. And Jamal's quiet independence, his ability to function outside her web of rules, made her itch. Her mission became clear: make him comply or make him miserable trying. He attended the next HOA meeting, a quiet Thursday evening in the community clubhouse. The air conditioning buzzed as neighbors sat in rows, sipping lemonade and trying to stay out of drama. Jamal stood and calmly presented his case. He brought diagrams, dates, power data, proof that the panels were not just legal, but vital. Karen, sitting at the front in a pastel blazer, barely looked up. "It's not about legality," she said, eyes narrowing. "It's about preserving the visual harmony of our neighborhood." A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. One older neighbor whispered, "Didn't his system keep our cameras running during the blackout?" Karen raised her voice slightly, redirecting the conversation to holiday decorations. The meeting moved on without resolution. Jamal left feeling like he'd walked into a performance rather than a discussion. She didn't want the truth. She wanted submission. Soon after Karen escalated further, she sent him a deadline to remove or alter the panels to comply with neighborhood design standards. He appealed formally, but the hearing was mysteriously postponed 3 times. The tension grew. Karen began eyeing his home during her walks, clipboard always in hand. Jamal could feel it, the pettiness building, the quiet war entering its final, ridiculous phase. He just didn't expect how far she'd go. It happened while Jamal was out of town for a tech conference. He'd left early Thursday morning, locking up the house, setting the smart sensors, and trusting everything would be as he left it when he returned. But by Saturday afternoon, a neighbor named Eleanor sent him a photo that made his stomach drop. It showed the roof of his house, except the once black solar panels were now painted a dull, chalky beige. The caption beneath the photo read, "Did you approve this?" At first he thought it had to be a mistake. Maybe someone tagged the wrong house, or maybe the image was filtered strangely. But more pictures came in, one from across the street, another from a drone a local teen flew around the neighborhood. There was no mistaking it. His solar panels had been deliberately painted over, coated in thick, matte paint, rendering them completely useless. Then came the letter. taped neatly to his front door, sealed in plastic like some kind of formal decree. Karen's handwriting was unmistakable. As of today, your property has been brought into compliance with HOA regulations concerning aesthetic uniformity. The reflective nature and placement of your panels posed a community-wide concern. This corrective action was necessary. She signed it like it was some benevolent gift. No apology, no warning, just a smug declaration of authority. Jamal stared at the photos from his hotel room, heart pounding. She'd done it. Without his permission, without due process. She'd vandalized private property under the guise of neighborhood order. But she didn't just mess with his house. She crippled the system that helped keep the entire block safe. He pulled up his dashboard remotely. As he feared, the panels were dead. No power intake, no battery charge, no backup. It was as if someone had pulled the plug on a quiet, invisible safety net. He couldn't do anything from his hotel room, but he could already see the chain reaction beginning. Karen had no idea what she had disrupted. Or worse, maybe she didn't care. Jamal packed his bags immediately and booked an early flight home. The war wasn't petty anymore. It had just crossed a line that couldn't be painted over. That night, just hours after the panels had been painted, the power flickered. At first, it was just a brief dimming, something most people would shrug off as a glitch. But within minutes, the streetlights on Birchwood Lane blinked out completely, followed by the surveillance cameras stationed at both ends of the neighborhood gate. The backup power system that Jamal had quietly fed into was dead, starved of the solar input it needed. Karen had, unknowingly, severed the lifeline that protected the entire block. Across the street, a motion-sensitive porch light failed to turn on when a figure moved across the lawn. In the cul-de-sac, a woman named Linda opened her blinds to total darkness outside, her security lights out and her phone buzzing with missed notifications from her disabled camera app. In less than 30 minutes, the neighborhood fell into the kind of darkness that made people nervous. They weren't used to this. Not here. Around 2:00 a.m., a group of teenagers, probably from outside the community, wandered in through the front gate, which had glitched open and remained that way. They noticed the lack of light, the silence, the opportunity. A few cars were rifled through, packages disappeared off porches. One house's garage door was found slightly open the next morning, its security sensor unresponsive. Neighbors began to call and text one another in confusion and concern. Some called the HOA emergency line, but it went to voicemail. Karen, confident in her decision and oblivious to the brewing chaos, slept soundly in her two-story colonial with blackout curtains drawn. She had no idea that her crusade for visual harmony had thrown the entire neighborhood into vulnerability. By morning, the chatter was everywhere. The community group chat was on fire. People sharing Ring camera footage that had gone blank, reporting missing items, posting screenshots of malfunctioning systems. One man even claimed he saw flashlights moving around in his backyard in the middle of the night but couldn't prove it. The HOA email inbox filled with complaints, and someone finally asked the big question: why didn't the security system switch to solar backup like last time? Only a few residents knew that Jamal's panels had been silently supporting the security infrastructure. Fewer still realized that those panels had been vandalized. But as word spread about the blackout, about the break-ins, about the gate malfunctioning, the truth began to surface. A few neighbors who knew Jamal and his setup started putting the pieces together. One even drove by his house, stood in the driveway, and looked up at the lifeless beige panels with a sinking feeling. Jamal, flying home that morning, was already drafting an email. Not angry, not even demanding, just a detailed log of what had happened, what had failed, and why. Karen had wanted a uniform neighborhood. What she'd created instead was a uniform sense of fear, and this time, people weren't going to be so quick to stay quiet. Jamal stepped out of the cab and into silence. His usually lively block felt off, curtains drawn, neighbors quietly peeking through windows, front lawns scattered with broken branches and misplaced trash cans. He walked up his driveway, suitcase rolling behind him, and looked up at the panels that once gleamed like black mirrors. Now they sat dulled and lifeless, coated in streaky beige, as if someone had tried to erase them from existence. His heart sank. The taped letter was still fluttering on his front door, barely clinging on after the night's wind. He didn't bother reading it again. He stepped inside, powered up his tablet, and pulled up the monitoring system. The dashboard was blank. No intake, no battery status, no grid flow. Every solar connection was dead. He clicked through archived data and found the exact moment the paint had hit. The input dropped from full charge to flatline in under an hour. The batteries had depleted overnight, trying to keep systems alive. Now they were drained, silent. His phone lit up with voicemails and text messages from concerned neighbors. Elena had called twice. David next door sent a long message about the power outage, the failed gate, the teens caught wandering through yards. People were scared. Security footage had gone blank right when it was needed most. The neighborhood, always proud of its tight-knit safety, now buzzed with worry and tension, and all of it pointed back to one act of spite. Jamal opened the garage and checked the inverter and storage units. They weren't damaged, just inactive. The damage was entirely superficial, but strategically devastating. Karen hadn't needed to destroy the system, just interrupt it long enough to cause chaos, and she'd succeeded. He stood there for a moment, surrounded by quiet hums of tech no longer working, the house still and heavy. It wasn't about the panels anymore. It was about being undermined, disrespected, and blamed for the very thing he had worked to prevent. He knew what needed to happen next. Not just repairs, but accountability. She'd made it personal. And now, it was time to show the neighborhood just how personal this had become. The clubhouse was packed, the air heavy with anticipation and barely restrained frustration. Folding chairs had been pulled from storage and arranged in haphazard rows as neighbors filed in, whispering and casting sideways glances toward the front of the room. Karen sat rigid at the head table, lips pursed, hands folded neatly over her binder. Her pastel blazer looked slightly rumpled, as if even she knew this meeting wouldn't be easy. The HOA board members flanked her, some nervously adjusting papers, others avoiding eye contact with the crowd. Jamal walked in with a calm expression, holding a black folder under one arm. He didn't speak right away. He waited as the murmurs settled, as people turned their attention toward the man whose house had become the epicenter of the neighborhood's unraveling. Karen cleared her throat and attempted to begin with routine announcements, but someone from the back interrupted her. "Let him talk," the voice said. Others murmured in agreement. Karen's jaw tightened. Jamal stepped forward and opened his folder. He began not with anger, but facts. He showed printed logs from his solar dashboard, highlighting the exact moment the panels stopped producing energy. He explained how his system had been supplying emergency power to the community's security infrastructure, something he had volunteered to do quietly, with approval from the previous board. Then he pulled out photographs, before and after images of the panels, detailed shots of the paint application, and a copy of Karen's note taped to his door. The room was silent. Next came the footage. Jamal connected his tablet to the projector and played a video compilation showing the moment the security system went offline, followed by timestamps of the break-ins and disturbances that occurred during the blackout. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone muttered, "That could have been my house." Karen tried to interject, claiming she had acted in accordance with neighborhood bylaws, but Jamal responded coolly, pointing out that the board had never voted on any such action, and that entering someone's property and damaging personal equipment was a criminal offense, not a community adjustment. One by one, neighbors stood up. They asked questions. They demanded answers. And as Karen stumbled through excuses and half-truths, it became clear that her grip on control was slipping. The room had turned. Order, once her weapon, was now rising against her. By the next morning, the story had spread far beyond the clubhouse walls. Someone had recorded Jamal's presentation and uploaded the video to the neighborhood Facebook group, where it exploded with comments, shares, and outrage. Within hours, it made its way to a local news blog, headlined, "HOA President Sabotages Solar Panels Powering Neighborhood Security." The article detailed everything: Karen's unauthorized decision, the resulting blackout, and the safety breaches that followed. Jamal's calm but damning evidence played on repeat in every share, painting a picture that even Karen couldn't spin her way out of. Neighbors who had once stayed silent began speaking up. People remembered other petty fines, backdated violations, and questionable board decisions that had gone unchallenged under Karen's leadership. One resident admitted he'd been fined twice for using an eco-friendly mailbox that clashed with colonial charm. Another posted a letter Karen had written about a garden statue being spiritually disruptive. Individually, these things had seemed too small to fight. But now, under the weight of Jamal's situation, they formed a larger, undeniable pattern. The HOA's inbox flooded with requests for a formal review. Petitions circulated for Karen's removal. A group of residents called for an emergency vote, citing misuse of power and reckless endangerment. Karen, once seen as strict but orderly, now stood exposed as vindictive and dangerous. Even those who had backed her began to distance themselves. One board member resigned, calling the situation a complete betrayal of trust. Karen issued a short statement by email, carefully worded, defensive, and lacking any real apology. It only fueled the fire. The comment section under the local blog post turned vicious. Memes surfaced. Someone even painted a fake HOA violation sign and stuck it in her front yard overnight. Violation, abuse of power, and common sense. Within a week, the emergency vote was held. The turnout was massive. By a landslide, Karen was removed from office. A new interim board was elected with a promise of transparency and reform. Jamal, for his part, stayed quiet throughout it all. He hadn't asked for drama, hadn't sought revenge. But justice had arrived anyway, swift and public. And the woman who once ruled with a clipboard now sat behind drawn blinds, watching her kingdom unravel from the other side of the glass. The next weekend, Jamal stood on his roof under the soft morning sun, a paint scraper in one hand and a gentle smile on his face. He wasn't alone. Eleanor from across the street handed him supplies, while David held the ladder steady below. Other neighbors gathered around, some offering to help clean, others just bringing snacks and coffee. It wasn't a formal volunteer event, but something more genuine, a quiet way of making things right. No one had asked Jamal to forgive the neighborhood, yet here they were, showing up with buckets, brushes, and goodwill. The paint came off slowly but not impossibly. With careful work, they began restoring the panels one by one. A few kids, curious and wide-eyed, asked Jamal about the system and how it worked. Instead of brushing them off, he invited them into the garage to see the battery banks and explained the basics of solar energy. What started as a cleanup turned into an impromptu workshop. The same neighbors who once questioned his setup were now leaning in, asking how they could install panels themselves. By evening, the panels gleamed once more, soaking up sunlight as if they had been holding their breath. Jamal powered the system back on and watched the dashboard flicker to life, current flowing, batteries charging, security feeds blinking back to green. The streetlights would shine again that night, and not just from the city's grid. They'd shine because of him, because of a quiet act of kindness that had become essential. The new HOA board, more balanced and diverse, held their first meeting under a very different tone. Jamal was invited to speak, not to be reprimanded, but to advise. He declined the offer to join the board, preferring his role behind the scenes, but agreed to help create guidelines that supported innovation without fear. For once, the rules would protect progress, not punish it. People began to talk to one another more. The block felt warmer, more connected. The shadows of fear and control faded, replaced by something simpler, mutual respect. Jamal didn't say much about what happened. He didn't need to. His actions had spoken clearly, and the neighborhood had finally heard him. What Karen had tried to erase had been restored, not just in hardware, but in spirit. A moving truck pulled up to Karen's house early one Tuesday morning, its engine humming quietly as two men in matching shirts began loading boxes. There was no fanfare, no farewell gathering, no neighbor bringing over cookies or a card. Just the low shuffle of cardboard and the dull thud of belongings being stacked and sealed. Curtains remained drawn, and the front door stayed closed except for the occasional hurried exit. She didn't wave to anyone. No one waved back. Word had spread that Karen had listed her house a week after the emergency vote. The listing was discreet, without a yard sign, just a quiet whisper among realtors. She didn't attend the final HOA meeting or issue any public statement. Her email address on file was suddenly inactive. Her voice, once so present in every corner of the neighborhood, had vanished. Jamal noticed from his window but said nothing. He watched her for a moment as she stepped onto the porch, clutching a final box, and paused. She looked at the neighborhood with a blank expression. Not regretful, not angry, just tired. Maybe she realized what she'd lost, or maybe she still believed she had been right. It didn't matter anymore. Her era was over. As the truck pulled away, a few neighbors peeked out from their windows, then quietly went back to their mornings. The street felt lighter, as if a cloud had been lifted. There were no celebrations, no gossip in the group chat, just a mutual sense of closure. Jamal went back to tending his garden, the hum of restored solar energy buzzing softly in the background. The panels above him glinted in the sunlight, unbothered and unbroken. Karen's departure didn't need noise. Sometimes justice arrives in silence and leaves the same way. In the end, it wasn't revenge that brought peace, it was clarity. Jamal never raised his voice, never retaliated with the same pettiness that had been thrown at him. He let the facts speak, let the truth shine just as steadily as the panels above his home. What Karen tried to cover, literally and figuratively, only became more visible. The power she once used to control others had turned on her, quietly and completely. The neighborhood, once wary of change, had seen what real contribution looked like, not in rules or fines or tidy shrub lines, but in action, in silent protection during a storm, in energy shared without condition. Jamal's quiet strength reminded them all what community should be: collaborative, compassionate, forward-thinking. Now, when the sun rises over the rooftops of Birchwood Lane, its light reflects off more than just solar panels. It reflects off a lesson learned, a neighborhood grown, and a man who chose resilience over retaliation. Justice didn't need noise, it just needed sunlight, time, and someone willing to stand firm without shouting. As Jamal sipped his morning coffee and watched the panels hum back to life, he smiled. Karma, it turns out, runs beautifully on solar.